WTVS Detroit and the National Black Programming Consortium present a special town meeting on the State of Black America 1984. Joining us, an audience of over 200 concerned citizens from the city of Detroit and a distinguished panel. Robert Woodson, President of the National Center for Neighborhood Enterprise. Unita Blackwell, Mayor of Myersville, Mississippi. Randall Robinson, Executive Director of Trans-Africa. Eleanor Holmes Norton, Professor of Law and former Chair of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Arthur Fletcher, a businessman and former Assistant Secretary of Labor. Amiri Baraca, author, playwright, and educator. And our moderator, news commentator and political analyst, Roger Wilkins.
This is a year of anniversaries filled with great meaning for Black Americans. 30 years ago this month, the Supreme Court decided in Brown against Topeka Board of Education that segregation in the public schools was unconstitutional. 20 years ago in July, the Congress enacted and President Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which encompassed many of the goals which blacks and their white allies had sought so fervently for half a century. Tonight, a panel of distinguished Black Americans and a studio audience will try to gauge the state of Black America as it remembers those anniversaries. We will talk about politics and economics and foreign affairs and more in an effort to see where we are. The central issue, it seems to me, is whether we Americans have achieved that plateau beyond racism where enforcement of the laws must be colorblind, as the administration contends, or whether, on the other hand, strong enforcement efforts and massive program assistance are still required, as civil rights advocates contend. Or to put it another way, how do you add up the blacks sitting behind mayors' desks in cities around the country on the one hand, and tens of thousands of working welfare mothers struggling to raise families on the other, and come out with a picture that makes sense? Dwight D. Eisenhower, who opposed the Brown decision, was in the middle of his first term when the case was decided 30 years ago. President Johnson, a strong advocate of civil rights measures, was elected in his own right 20 years ago. This year, Jesse Jackson is making history with the most prolonged and seriously regarded presidential campaign ever mounted by a black person. Politics is as good a place to start as any. Does this progression accurately reflect a sure upward trend in the fortunes of blacks in America? We'll start with a former Democratic appointee, Professor Norton. What do you think?
Well, if I may say so, Roger, I don't think that Jesse Jackson's candidacy can be compared to 20 years ago or even 30 years ago, because it is a unique, incomparable, historic event. If you look at the presidents 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and look at those running for president today, among those who are white, there is not a great deal of difference between those two groups of people. Jesse Jackson, on the other hand, represents a singular development, the first of its kind. So I find it hard to see it as part of a continuum. If it's a part of any continuum, I think it's a part of the continuum of the development of Black America in particular.
Well, I think that there's significance of Jesse's candidacy is that he is asking other groups to join him, to join blacks. I think, and at the time the civil rights legislation was passed, it was for blacks to address the black condition. And since then, it has expanded to include women, to include gays, to include any number of groups, to the point that Jack Greenberg, at a conference I attended with him last week, could say to me and the others there, a public forum, that 50% of the incoming class at Harvard this year are made up of minorities. Now, it's possible that he can say that and not include one black. And the question is that progress? The second short point is that the extent to which we can translate political power to economic power to the point that it positively affects the black underclass, then that is change. If it means that we just expand the black middle class, and it is expanding, while the black underclass expands, the question that I have that I hope we will discuss is there a correlation between those two phenomena? And if it is, then we need to challenge the traditional wisdom that a civil rights approach is the only approach, a single approach that we as blacks should be taking.
Well, do you think that politics can translate into progress for the underclass?
If you really, it can if the black politicians pursue policies of economic development. But if they accept the fact that we place an awful lot of value in symbolism. Symbolism is important, but substance is critical. And so that we have got to if a black politician gets into office and pursues the same policies that are bankrupt when white folks were in office, the consequence will be the same if a Klan person was in office. See, what we need to be addressing is, to what extent are you pursuing policies that are helpful to the underclass? And that should be the most important measure of whether we support a black politician or not. Not whether to stop at the point where, well, we have a black politician and therefore our problems are solved. That is one of our critical problems.
Amiri Baraca, you're from Newark. You know a lot about the problem of trying to hold black office holders accountable. How do you respond to what Bob Woodson just said?
Well, I guess they have a good example here in Detroit of trying to hold, black office holders accountable. But I'd say this, you see, the question, the question to me is one of democracy, fundamentally. And black people, we're the only ones been slaves in this country, totally disenfranchised. We were excluded from the society, and then we were segregated within it, you see. We still exist in a kind of twilight zone between citizenship and slavery. So the question is, you cannot have economic power without political power. I agree with, the brother here that if black politicians just follow the same bankrupt policies of, say, the Reagans or the Carters or whoever, then you get the same results. Obviously, we see that in Newark, painfully, very painfully, where our mayor has been doing nothing but, jiving us for, about 14 years, But at the same time, Jesse's important because what he's trying to do is, first of all, show that black people take radical positions, you understand? Not just to be radical because we're on the bottom. You see, the person who is in the most pain is going to scream the loudest. You see what I mean? And what everybody in this society has to realize, and Jesse makes crystal clear, is that his policies are progressive for everyone, that it's not just a black thing. You see, what Jesse is saying will help the whole rainbow. By rainbow, we mean a multinational coalition. And segregation weakens all of us. That's why the people that run this society like to keep us all compartmentalized and segregated, because if we ever get together and find out who the real enemy is and who got all the money, then it'll be changed very rapidly.
Well, I think when we talk about continuing, as we look back what has happened, of course I'm not that old, but I've been around for, 2 decades of the civil rights situation, the first 10 years and then the next 10 years, which is approximately 20 years. We do have a continuation, and when we're talking about politics, and now that we can look at it and see that we have 252 black mayors throughout the United States, and 31 of them is women. And then when we look at maybe when we look at, say, the welfare mothers and the problems we have over there, that the name of this program, the state of what's happening in black America, we still is in a dilemma. And what we find ourselves with Jesse running, and even before him was Shirley Chisholm and Dick Gregory, and we have to look at people, what I call planting a seed, and the seeds has been planted as we come on through from Brown versus 1954, the educational situation, and now you see where it's at, that finally somebody says that the education is in bad shape. It's a process that I think that we find ourselves going through, and I'm ready for the process.
Randall Robinson, you have spent a long time in Washington on Capitol Hill working with the Black Caucus, now as the head of a black lobbying organization, you have seen black people try to hold black politicians accountable. Is it possible over the long haul? Are blacks being successful, at least in holding the Congressional Black Caucus accountable?
Well, certainly in foreign policy, the problem is not with the black politician. The Congressional Black Caucus has demonstrated a tremendously increasing interest in foreign policy questions. Black mayors and elected officials across the country have as well. The problem is with the tradition of American policy towards the third world. I was thinking as we were talking about Jesse's ascendancy being a sort of happy end of a continuum, but when we look at American foreign policy in the Caribbean, in Central America, in Southern Africa, in Africa in general, in the Middle East, and across the globe, we see tragic results of a policy that is rested on the notion that the Soviet Union is responsible for everything that goes wrong in the world. Whatever side the Soviets get on, the United States gets on the other side. So that one wonders if at least once in this country's diplomacy, it will ever end up on the right social justice side of any issue. And I think increasingly Americans are learning more about this, and the Congressional Black Caucus is taking a leadership role, but much more has to be done. I think the sophistication of black Americans must increase to a point where they know that our destinies are indissolubly tied to the destinies of those who struggle for freedom in Southern Africa, those who struggle in Cuba, those who struggle in Haiti, those who struggle in Central America. And we've got to separate, I think, the good from the bad. When we look at a Central American policy that sees an invasion every 3 years for the last 150 years, whenever any country gets cheeky with the United States, we simply march in and overthrow governments. It has nothing to do with democracy, has nothing to do with social justice. It has everything to do with countries practicing serious self-determination. One takes a country like Cuba. Blacks in Cuba make up 30% of the population. They're doing enormously better than they did under the Batista regime. Infant mortality is lower than it is in the District of Columbia. The lifespan has been increased from 59 to 72 years, yet Cuba as a government, this administration and previous administrations have tried to strangle for the last 20 years. But we prop up Haiti, and we prop up South Africa. We're trying to finish Nicaragua. We're trying to support a tremendously corrupt regime in El Salvador. So that I think it behooves all of us to look behind what we read in media in the United States, to see how the people in these countries are faring. Because for most of the people who live and struggle around the world, it's not a question of capitalism or communism. It's the question of 3 meals a day-ism, a question of a roof over my head-ism, an education, a place to go to school. So that I think we have to examine all of these things, but the problem is not with the black elected official. The problem is with a tradition in the country that has ignored the plight of the dispossessed all across the third world.
Let's go to the audience. Over there in left field.
My name is Attorney El Hadi T. Shabazz, and I'm a concerned citizen. I'd like to address my question to Brother Robert Woodson. I am personally tired of begging the white establishment for a job and being a victim of the decisions of the board of General Motors and like corporations around the world. What I would like to know from you is, how does a city like Detroit, with the majority of black people, over 60%, can turn this black power, this black political power, into some economic strength to be able to give our own people some jobs?
We have to promote. You see, if you look at, if we compare the plight of black people, any community that's healthy and participates generates about 3 jobs per 1,000. In the black community, we generate three businesses per 1,000. In the black community, we generate 3 businesses per 100,000. So the answer is in entrepreneurship. Let me give you one example of what I mean. In 1954, when the Supreme Court was making that decision, two brothers, two black men in California named McDonald's. The name sound familiar to you?
Yes, it does.
McDonald's, you bet you didn't know they were black. They devised a whole new system of fast foods. And Ray Kroc, a white entrepreneur at the time, who made those machines that make milkshakes, got an order for 8 machines. He got on the plane to find out why these people were ordering it, and he saw that crowds were all over their stores. Ray Kroc gave them $2 million and turned it into a $1 billion industry. Now, if we had our stuff together, we would have gone to those brothers, and we would have spent some of our energies in developing an industry that instead we don't concentrate ourselves on going to the untutored masses. Instead, we think every problem has to be solved by someone with professional degrees. But most of the business leaders in this country and entrepreneurs are not people with professional training. Because when you get professionally trained, you don't take risks.
My name is Connell Smith. I am a concerned citizen. I'm curious as to how we translate a posture of consciousness and being opposed to the American government support for such regimes as in Haiti, the invasion of Grenada, support for South Africa, from a policy position to manifesting in some way, some kind of action. I'm concerned that black youth, black men were involved in the invasion of Grenada, and it's the same potential for Southern Africa.
I think the first thing to understand is that foreign policy has never rested on morality and sentiment. The State Department may be the most segregated agency in the federal government. There are few, if any, blacks in policymaking positions. There's no black assistant secretary of state. There's only one black deputy assistant secretary of state in a policymaking position. The ambassadorial corps has been virtually cut in half by the Reagan administration, so that politicians understand political pressure. That when I come to see you as an elected official, if I can't demonstrate to you what I can do to alter your fortunes, what I can do to make you more electable or less electable, I'm wasting your time. So that we have to understand, with this new ascendancy, this new power in the country, that we are the margin of difference for the Democrats in November. And that for our support, there has to be a policy price paid. These are the things that we want. We don't want photo opportunities in the Oval Office. We want photo opportunities. We have specific policies that we want to see pursued. We don't understand how this country can invest to the tune of $2 billion in South Africa, lend to it $2 billion, diplomatically embrace it, and at the same time not recognize Angola, not give to Mozambique, starve Ethiopia, do these things in the Caribbean and prop up Haiti. But when you go into these meetings, and when we negotiate with Walter Mondale, or with Jesse, and we don't need to negotiate with him, but with a heart, or with any official who wants our support in any community across this country, these things have to be on the laundry list. If you demonstrate to politicians you're prepared to punish them for not being responsive, then you'll get a different kind of response.
Amiri Baraca wanted to speak about 10 minutes ago.
Right.
I don't know whether he wants to talk about domestic issues or foreign.
Well, they're all hooked up. You know, I think there's no, see, I think one thing we always lose sight on why these people do this, why they do that. Are they dumb, or they don't like this, they don't like. They are monopoly capitalists domestically, and they're imperialists internationally. You understand what I mean? That's what they are. You see what I'm saying? So that the question, for instance, of we talk about the majority of black people, somebody said underclass, the majority of black people work for a living. They're working class people. The majority of white people in this country work for a living. The question is that the people who run this country do not serve the interests of working people in this country or working people anywhere on the planet. They serve the interests of a small little group, 0.6% of this population, the Morgans, the Rockefellers, and the DuPonts, who own the world. you understand, who control the world. And when we talk about, for instance, the question of political power versus economic development, you understand? The reason that McDonald could come in there and snatch that idea from them brothers is he got political connections everywhere. It's not because he's smarter. See, and so the question of get our thing together means that you have to organize yourself to struggle for political power. And when you organize yourself, then you are in tune with people all over the world struggling for political power. You're in tune with the Palestinians. You're in tune with the brothers and sisters down in South Africa struggling to overthrow that. You're in tune with the Irish, you understand, an Irish Republican Army trying to run the English out of Ireland, you understand? So the whole question of organizing, so we don't get into the old fight, you know, Booker T versus Du Bois. Which shall we do? Economic struggle, but no political thing, or political struggle, you understand? We have to understand that it's all one idea, and then finally, black people in this country are part of a united front. And in fact, it is an international, world united front struggling against imperialism. And we can never get rid of racism until we get rid of its economic base. You understand? Until we get rid of its economic base, we can't get rid of racism, we can't get rid of women's oppression, because those are not just bad ideas, they make profit for a small group of people, and that small group of people run the world, and particularly this country. And the Negroes, you see, most of them work for them, and must have the same ideas that they have. Yeah.
Arthur Fletcher spent a lot of years in the Labor Department, and I'm sure he's got comments about what has just been said.
Yes, that and some other. Let me focus for just a minute on the resources required to start economic development. I think one of the points Bob Woodward was trying to make is very simple. We do a lot of talking about $165, $170 billion consumers market. I have had more than a few people in this country and abroad ask me point blank, if you have those kinds of dollars to spend, when are you going to recognize that they're resources and use them to mobilize this economic base that y'all keep talking about? For an example, I now understand that the National Baptist Conference is in the process of mobilizing $12 million every Sunday for 52 Sundays of the year. That's 600 and some million dollars. They're in the process of creating a bank, in the process of creating some insurance companies, and in the process of providing the resources required to control the economy of the black community. Now, until that begins to happen, the clapping and the shouting is just that, and nothing more. Now, let me go one step further. When they put these banks in, I would hope you put your money in that bank, instead of saying, they've been in the banking business long enough, I'm going to take my bank on down there and put my money in the bank that's loaning it to all these foreign countries that y'all have been shouting about. Now, I'm going to say that again. It is your money that they are loaning to the countries that he's, or failing to loan to the countries that he's talking about. Now, when we get the kind of political leader in office that understands that, you will not only see a change in your climate and the environment, you're going to see a significant change in your behavior. Now, what is wrong with black elected officials at the moment? I don't want to condemn them to the degree that others do. The fact of the matter is, what we did was use the human capabilities that were available when they ran for office. Most of them had training in sociology, political science, and the various other kinds of science. Very few. I don't think you can identify 5 blacks who are serving a mayor right now who had any background at all in financial management. Okay, yeah, they are the ones who collect the taxes, and they're the ones who sit and help decide how these taxes are to be spent. The reason I'm excited about what Jesse is doing is because I see a new group of young leaders recognizing that if we're going to get into the economic warfare, and that's what it is, it's warfare. If we're going to join economic warfare, we can't do that with people who have a sociology background. Now, that's what my background is, so don't nobody get excited. However, I am a businessman today, and my little firm does a couple, $3 million worth of business, and I got a couple of hundred people on my payroll. And I know what's involved in managing money. That's what I'm talking about. Now, when we get elected officials who understand that, then the things that most of the panelists here are talking about will be underway. I think we're right at the cutting edge of getting ready to do that. And that's what excites me.
Well, it really sounds good. I just, you know, one of the things that, and we talk about rural area, because that's where I'm from, and you wouldn't find anybody with all those degrees that, you know, mostly, you know, that Art was just speaking of. But I feel that we have to go back to, you do with what you have. And we in the South had to use what we had. And that is that we know that we had been done wrong. And we didn't have any political power. And they told us to go and register to vote. And we couldn't, because that was a long process. So when we talk about how we get out here and do all these things, you know, it just didn't just come about overnight. And how the people can get on TV, you know, because I think that we have to understand that Jesse is on TV, looking good. But you know, for a long time, they wouldn't dare put Jesse on TV. So I think that what we're talking about in process, and I'm back to that word again, that we go through, and we down, just about the time we have 400 and about 90 something in all now in the state of Mississippi, black elected officials. And I don't know what we tell them if we say, you can't be that, you know. I think that what we got to do, we got to be careful how we walk this walk and talk this talk, because people has laid some sweat, blood, and tears. And we've been to jail, we've been beat, and we done died.
Thank you.
And I think that when we get up, you know, in certain areas, there's a middle class talk, and there is what we call the down home country folks talk. You see what I'm saying? Homeboy. And I think that one of the things is that, you know, we talk about all these executives and all this here, but the masses of the people, black people in this country, is never going to even submerge to whatever it is that you all just talked about. You understand me? That's a fact. Because it's going to take another 30 years to that come about. And I think in the meantime, it's what kind of leader do you want? That is the question. What do you want them to produce? The people can say to you, we want basic things, jobs. What kind of job? Job I can do, you see. That I can get. You don't come up to me and tell me you're going to create something, and I'm hungry now. You see what I'm saying? That's right. And then when we talk about education, we should start now to make sure that your children and my children's grandchildren and everything gets educated. We start now. But in the meantime, let's deal with where we are. And I think that I am a black politician. That's what they call us. But I didn't start out that way. And I think that we can't sit around and make like that we the same kind of politicians that the white folks is. Because we are not. You know what I mean?
Let's see what the people in the audience think. Over there in right field.
Yes, I'm Irma Henderson, President of Detroit City Council. I'm a good black politician. And I believe in fighting for the set-asides that are coming through federal government. I believe in fighting for job training and opportunities and retraining of our people. Why are we not then tackling things like FCC? And that's what's controlling the minds of our people. This is the thing that's got us all twisted up. we are all racing to get to a television station or television radio or something, and to hear the kind of crap, if you please, that comes over those stations and twist the moral thinking, the moral fiber of our people. Why don't we organize to try to get the middle class to take our people up off their knees so that we can furnish them the kind of information that they need?
Let's see what Bob Woodson has to say about that.
I agree, and we need to do more to promote self-help and communicate to our people that development begins in our minds. We first have to believe we got the capacity to develop.
I believe that.
And I know, for instance, we've been looking at, even in public housing project in Washington, D.C., had all the problems of any other public housing project. Only 2 kids ever finished to go to college. But when a resident and her own organization took over, we have 400 youngsters going on to college from this public housing project. Now they've taken over management, doing it better than the city. Now they're ready for ownership. But yet, she cannot get any help from the city or other politicians or middle-class people. She is, to me, she represents the kind of future leadership. She's raised 5 children in public housing. They went on to college. Kimmy Gray, her name is. And yet, she cannot qualify to even open a daycare center as a business because she doesn't have college training. So we got to address not just changing the rule maker, we got to change the rules.
All right, that's it.
Over there.
My name is Betty Price. I am the Director of Health and Physical Education in the Highland Park School System, and I direct my question to Mr. Fletcher. As an educator of principally black children, what can I tell my students with respect to their future as to how it might be enhanced due to the re-election of Ronald Reagan?
Well, let me, are you finished?
Yes, I am.
I don't have a problem with Ronald Reagan because Ronald Reagan isn't the issue. Ronald Reagan's only going to be the president for 4 more years. I would hope the youngsters if he makes it, I would hope that the youngsters that you are preparing, you and I and others are preparing, are going to live a lot longer than 4 years. What I'm about, and I go to school, somebody talks about middle-class folks. Since I hire people, I do some work to prepare them not only to work for me, but to be productive and to keep me and other folks in business. What I'm doing right now is getting teachers to understand the importance, at this very moment, the importance of the ability to read, to write, to calculate, and to communicate. So what I'm concerned with right now is that we teach our youngsters, and those of us who have to hire them, go back into that classroom and make sure they understand that they're not competing at the moment for entry-level jobs. They're not competing at the moment with another human being. Right now they're competing with a robot. And that robot is wiping out entry-level jobs from the first level all the way up to the middle of the ladder. Today, the entry-level job is right up at the middle of the ladder. Consequently, I'm saying to them, there isn't even, if the trend goes the way it's going, young man, young lady, and you, teacher, if it continues to go this way, there won't even be a human being teaching you, son. You're going to sit there and look at a television set with some words on it and a workbook over here, and you have to learn it by yourself. So I'm telling the teachers every time I can get a chance to, every parent I can get a chance to, if there was ever a moment of truth, it is now. We must see to it that our youngsters master the ability to read, to write, to calculate, and to communicate. And those of us who have mastered the art of self-teaching share that with a youngster so he or she can understand that I can teach myself once I've mastered those tools, and they'll outlast Reagan or any other president, Democrat, Republican, or stripe.
We've got another perspective on that from Amiri Baraca.
I think what you should tell children first is defeat Reagan. That's what you should tell them first. And I think, because what Brother Fletcher says about robots, we won't even get them. You understand what I mean? I mean, everybody else will have robots. We won't even get that. But that's what's so important about Jesse's campaign to address the other lady out here, because he is on television before millions of people raising questions about unemployment and South Africa, while Hart and Mondale, Tweedledee, Tweedledum, and Ronald Reagan, who is actually, some kind of fascist-minded person, you understand, do not represent our interests. And to get to the question about education and politicians, I'm not saying politicians are bad. You understand? I'm saying that if the politicians do not represent the people, if we put politicians in that do not represent our interests, who get into office and then connect up with the same old white racist monopoly capitalist anti-women system, you understand what I mean? Then there will be no change. You understand what I'm saying? So that question again of organization, you know, you cannot say self-help. This is what Reagan always says, volunteerism. And the reason that he says that is because he's trying to destroy the whole infrastructure of this society. He's trying to take it back pre-Civil War, you understand, and create a corporate state where the corporations run everything. You understand? Now, we are not getting anything when there is some small, minute public sector. You understand? 4 more years of that, the corporations will control completely from the environment, the economy. Now they're talking about today in the New York Times, the corporations now are going to run the jails. You understand? So what you have to do is tell them to defeat Reagan. First of all, you know.
Wait, Art. Over there.
I'm Ben Johnson. I'm an editor at the Detroit Free Press and a member of the Detroit chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists. My question is for Mr. Robinson, going back to foreign policy. When you have problems paying the rent every month, or you're worried about the utility company turning off the gas, it's kind of difficult to be involved in third world issues. I'm wondering if there is any way or any suggestion that you have on how we can get more people, more grassroots folks, middle class, people across the board, black folks involved in that policy, so we can work with you to help change the way the Reagan administration and other administrations deal with the third world.
You know, I have found that the problem in terms of fostering popular support for foreign policy initiatives is not it's more a problem of information than anything else. You cannot lobby and get involved in issues you know nothing about. I recall the Julian Bond story of going to the State Department to meet with them to talk about apartheid in South Africa, and with a number of state legislators from Georgia. And after the briefing, he took questions, the assistant secretary did, and the question from a prominent state legislator was, who is this guy, Mr. Apartheid? And how can we get him out of there? And what's he been doing anyhow? I think the principal problem in this country is that black and white people know nothing about anything west of Los Angeles or east of Washington, D.C. It's an enormously insular society.
Professor Norton.
I suppose that cruel as it may seem when one considers the state of black America today, that blacks have to face the fact that they've got to do it all. If you look only, for example, at domestic policy today, it's like looking the mule in the face without going around and seeing there's a whole lot more to the mule. The rest of the mule has a lot to do with foreign policy, has to do with arms buildup. And while we're looking in his teeth, they're dealing with the bulk of the mule. Arms buildup, it seems to me, deserves very special attention from black people, because nobody is going to deal with the imbalance without, in fact, taking on that issue. But I've got to say, finally, one word about Randall's issue, because I had a shocking experience on a university board on which I sit, where the university students came in to complain that although the university adhered to the Sullivan principles, those principles were not very effective. The pay gap between blacks and whites in South Africa has actually grown. The fact is—
The Sullivan principles are a voluntary set of principles that companies, American companies, are supposed to follow when they do business in South Africa.
Precisely. Those students were white, and in fact, white students across the United States are everywhere raising the South Africa issue. Well, I am ashamed of that. Not that they are doing so, my hat is off to them, but I am ashamed that there are not black students in the forefront of that effort. Because these, our brothers in South Africa, cannot speak for themselves. They cannot, for example, say that American companies should pull out of South Africa, because it is a crime to say that, and you go to jail for saying it. So if they cannot say it, and if we will not say it, then it shall not be said. Above all, at a point when we finally have blacks spread in places they were never found 20 years ago, there ought to be some blacks, particularly those who have the privilege of going to college, who will speak up for the most oppressed people in the world, black South Africans.
Mayor Blackwell.
I think that one of the things, I just want to get back to the question that he was saying about, it's hard to get people to understand when it's about bread and butter and how they're going to pay their rent. I've been to China several times, and I've worked on China relations between our two countries for the last 10 years. And when you talk about China, folks get leery, they didn't want to say that much about it. What good is China with black folks, But then when you look up and see Reagan ends up in China, you know what I'm trying to say? then that's when I was doing it, wasn't much said about it when we was doing all the work and the process and putting it together and so forth. But then when all the cameras comes out, when the President of the United States go there, what is it all about? It's about trade. There you go. It's about trade. And when you talk about foreign policy, you talk about foreign policy in terms to the people on the side of the streets or anything. I said, let me tell you about China. Let me tell you about what's happening in Southeast Asia. Let me tell you what's happening in Africa. It's all about money, honey. And and that's the way you do it, you see? Because if you don't get it across this way, because that we thought the money was all tied within, quote, the United States. I always say to them that the United States is in debt. Seriously, you see. And it means that we're going to have to deal with the rest of the world. And this is the reason why that your check going to be cut off, and this is going to happen. And your job is going out the window because it's more feasible for the United States to deal a businessman to go to Singapore and get somebody to work there than it is for you, because you calling for a certain amount of money. And so I think that what we have to do is to take it on, foreign policy, the way we took on everything else, voting rights and so forth, and know it's a process that we're going to have to go through again. We have to teach our people. And we are accountable to teach our people what is these big words. Foreign policy. You see what I mean?
The person who's been waiting patiently in the audience out there.
Thank you. I'm Joyce Garrett, Personnel Director for the City of Detroit. I realize that we have all these international abstractions in terms of things we must understand as a people, and I think gradually we are acquiring that kind of information. But along the way, I believe panelist Baraca said that we need to be rid of racism. Well, I'll be honest with you, I don't have a lot of faith in getting rid of racism anytime soon. But I certainly would like to think that we're going to get rid of Reagan. And I do feel very strongly that the first item on our agenda at this present time has to be direct action. And so therefore, I am interested, frankly, in positive strategic plans in how black people can, in fact, exert the most leverage. And please, with all due respect to Jesse Jackson's candidacy, he cannot be president because he cannot win.
I think that it's a mistake to teach our children, and it's also a profession of impotence, to say to them that our fate and our future depends upon ending racism or who is president. I mean, when Jimmy Carter got elected, he promised jobs. Andy Young got the job. He made a statement that his responsibilities appear to be to do more than the Republicans. So I mean, we cannot say that. We need to teach our children that we have a rich history of self-help. We owned the railroad for 24 years in this country. Many of us don't know that. We also had 10 banks and savings and loans associations. We had 100 mutual aid societies taxing themselves 25 cents a week to support our own welfare system. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that
along with all of our rhetoric, we have got to go back into our own history and explore how our forefathers, in the face of racism, when we got hanged every day, and we were still developing and still producing jobs for ourselves, our own school system, our own banks. We need to examine that tradition and stop spilling this kind of poison out to our kids, that there's nothing you can do, that you can be undisciplined in school, that you can be men can be disrespectful to their women. All of this business because of racism. As Jesse Jackson said, let me conclude, that the victimizer might have knocked you down, but it is a victim's responsibility to get up.
One can agree with Bob about the importance of blacks taking control of their own destiny, whoever is president, without agreeing with him that it is irrelevant who is president. One thing we ought to teach our people is that it is very, very relevant who is president, and that is exactly why they ought to go out here and register every last one of them, and that is the basic message of Jesse Jackson. I think that Andy Young was not the only one that got a job. I think a whole lot of black people on CETA got jobs. I think a whole lot more happened in the last administration than happened in this administration, and no rhetoric can erase that. Black people have enough sense to know the difference between Carter and Reagan, and that difference cannot be wiped out. The fact is that Ronald Reagan's election in the last 3 years brought such demoralization to our communities as I have never seen in my lifetime. I have gone around the country speaking, and when I did not speak of the imminent death of the black community, people came up to me and say, how come you're so optimistic? I have never seen I never saw so much demoralization in the depths of segregation when I was going to segregated schools as I saw during these last 3 years. The fact is that the Jackson candidacy, wherever you stand on it, mobilized black people to go to the polls and register, and every black politician in the United States is going to profit from that. The Democratic Party, whoever is president, is going to profit from that. But above all, after we have gotten ourselves together on the vote in so many cities across the United States, the last message I want to come out from this program today is that it does not matter who is president. It matters who is president, and it matters that it not be Ronald Reagan next time.
That's right. Baraca.
Right. You know, I agree with the brother that studying our history is very important, because if we study our history, we'll find out that we're the only ones here who are slaves, and that we have not ever been all equal. It's like having a race where they hold you back in the locker room until the race is almost over, then say, go ahead, the race started. You understand? That's what's happening. And in terms of every time we do struggle and go to a certain point, you see, it's like the Sisyphus syndrome. You know that old myth where you roll the stone up the hill and you get it up the hill and roll back down? Well, after the Civil War and Reconstruction, you understand, the Hayes, Tilden Compromise, the Ku Klux Klan, and they drove us back until we got a Booker T, until we was flat on our backs. The same thing with the 60s. You understand? They killed Martin Luther King. He didn't just say, oh, well, I'm sorry, I'm tired of struggling. They killed Malcolm X. They killed Medgar Evers. You understand? They killed Featherstone. And the question about Jesse Jackson is the question of self-determination, that we want these people to know this. No, we want these people to know this. We want these, no, this is what we want. This is what we want these people to know. We want them to know we are with y'all. You understand? You want to blow up the world? We're not with that. You understand? You want to be racist? We're not with that. All your crazy stuff that you all talking about, we're not with that. Here we are, and if you want to do all those crazy things, we're not with that. We represent something progressive, and we link up with people all over the world.
We're rolling now. Arthur Fletcher.
That's what you wanted, huh?
Oh, yeah.
I want to make a couple of points, or try to. One, I want to come back to economics and trade.
That's right.
One, I hear my friend Randall and others talk about getting American corporations out of South Africa. Yes. I don't have any problems with that. I agree with that. But let me ask you, did you know that South Africa has $80 billion invested in American corporations in this country? Let me say that again. Let me say that again. They got $80 billion invested in corporations in this country. And if we got all of our corporations out of there, we still don't have them out of here.
That's next.
And in fact, there's a possibility you may be working for a corporation right here who controls the corporation that you work for. What we talking about is reality now, not rhetoric.
That's right.
We're talking about getting the kind of information required to make a decision out of. This is called the Information Society. It's time for us to clap and go on with the rhetoric, but when we get through, what is the information we need to make the kind of living that we have to make to sustain a climate, create a climate, and sustain an environment in which I can raise not my grandchildren, but my great-grandchildren. That's what I have. And now when we're dealing with that, then I'm ready to move. And I don't care who the president is.
All right, I think that Randall Robinson has some information he wants to give you.
All right.
You need it.
Art, you keep shifting sand.
No.
You've got to stand in one place or another.
I see the connection between all of them.
It is quite one thing to say that we have to live during a Republican administration, and we will persevere, and we will survive, and we will continue to struggle.
Say that with emphasis.
It is another thing to say that whether Reagan is reelected or not is irrelevant to black people. It is enormously relevant when the Supreme Court will be changed in such a fashion to carry this brand of conservatism into the next century, undoing everything that the Warren Court tried to establish to knock down hurdles to black people and women and other people over the last 20 years. That's very important. It's important that during the last 4 years we have seen the greatest shift in wealth from the bottom half to the top 5% than we've ever seen in this country's history, and we know that's been facilitated by the Reagan administration. It's important when we know that there are fewer blacks working in public agencies to facilitate programs for these cities, for these children going to school across the country in universities and public school systems, cutting funds to public education. That's important, and that will have a consequence for black people far into the future. In addition to which, I think it's important to add why South African money. It's not the South African government that has investments in the United States. The fact is that South African private interests, Harry Oppenheimer, owns parts of American corporations. The question is why? Because money is always smart. Money runs from revolution. Money is amoral. And the point is that Harry Oppenheimer knows that the South African system will topple. He is getting his money out. The money that ran out of El Salvador because of what's going on there is now leaving South Africa.
We are nearing the end of this session, and before we finish, I want to come back. I want us up here, you out there, to focus on something that Randall Robinson began to open earlier in the show. I have gone around this country for the last several years talking about nuclear disarmament, supporting the nuclear freeze, and people say to me, what is a black man doing talking about that? And I say, well, the bomb is an equal opportunity destroyer. And it seems to me that my children and grandchildren are going to have no better future if the bombs destroy them or if joblessness destroys them. So I want us to come back and talk about Central America. I want us to talk about Africa. And I want us to talk about whether and how black people can increase their leverage on the foreign policy-making process in this country. Randall,
I think the first thing to do, Roger, is to increase it by getting vigorously involved. Black Americans have a responsibility, as we have tried to humanize this country's domestic policy, to try to humanize its foreign policy. In the last analysis, we have to teach this country how to live in a new and different world.
You see, revolution in the third world, puts more pressure on the rulers in this country because all the super profits they get from Africa, Asia, and Central America, when people make revolution there, it takes those super profits away from them, and so they have to exploit us more here in the United States. And the people who get the brunt of that first, obviously, is the people on the bottom, which is black people, oppressed nationalities, the whole working class generally. That's why the whole key, in one sense, is to defeat Reagan, because, you see, he uses our tax dollars to defeat revolution in Nicaragua, to defeat revolution in El Salvador, to send troops in Lebanon supporting a fascist government, to invade Grenada, You understand? That was paid for with money that could be used to improve the schools in Detroit. And he spends it to invade Grenada. You see what I'm saying? In other words, he represents fascism domestically, moving toward the right domestically, and also internationally, and they're absolutely connected. The people all over the world are fighting to free themselves. You understand? They're out there shooting at imperialism. You see what I'm saying? And we have to understand that connection so that we can organize ourselves. Whether we're talking about building small businesses, whether we're talking about education, we have to build a united front that includes all the different classes of black people, and we have to connect that united front up with a united front of all the people in this country, what Jesse calls a rainbow coalition, to struggle for our interests, our democratic rights, our democracy here, because it's linked with democratic struggle all over the world.
I'd just like to say, you know, that we got a lot of work to do. That's for sure. That's for sure. One of the things is that, you know, we now know that as black people that we continue to look at what it is that we need to do, and this is the state that we are in black America.
That is about as good a benediction for this assessment of the state of black America, a title which we have graciously been allowed to use by the Urban League, which has a long and honorable program that it conducts under that title. All of us, every one of us, wherever we are, have an enormous amount to contribute to this struggle, which is multi-generational. And the greatest thing that we have to contribute to it is the strength that we impart to our children. Thank you for being with us.
To obtain a transcript of this program, send